end, and we should be good to go. Let's see. There we go. Welcome to my house. There's no good place to move things around when you have like a full workstation, right? Um, Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Waypoint Coffee Corner. This is our Saturday morning show and discussion where the pastor over Waypoint, sit down with various people that I've invited that I think are important voices to hear, to both learn from them and to also spend some time hearing their perspective and talking about different topics. So today I have with me one of my favorite teachers at Grossmont High School. I really only know a few, but he's the coolest dude. He's the coolest dude on the block. The first time I walked into his classroom was about 5 years ago. He is the advisor for the Christian club that I'm also the one of the pastors for over at Grossmont High School, Club Impact. I walked into his room and there's a drum kit set up, a piano set up, a whole PA speaker. He's got instruments everywhere. He's also a Laker fan and an Aztec fan, so basically we're the same person. No, I'm just kidding. Daemein Patterson, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Mike.
Yeah,
Great,
man.
great to be here.
I'm excited. I'm excited for this. I'm excited to shake off some of these cobwebs, get
For
the
sure.
coffee flowing. I gotta ask, and I need to mention to anyone who is here maybe for the first time or something like this. Waypoint Coffee Corner. Why are we Waypoint Coffee Corner? Because basically, I, as a pastor, often have these types of conversations with people in the corner of a coffee shop. So it was kind of one of these things where I was getting a little sad with the coronavirus,
Right.
because I wasn't able to do that for
Oh,
so, and I still you can't really do that indoors at least,
for sure.
and so I was like, you know what, I need to bring these conversations out to the public, and and thus the Waypoint podcast form was born.
Yeah.
I first thing I gotta ask,
Yes.
Daemein, Mr. P, Teacher P, Mr. Patterson, everyone.
Oh man, I've been called so many things.
Oh, I hope good things.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
I I gotta ask, what are your takes on coffee?
I be honest with you, I'm not a huge coffee drinker.
Okay,
I haven't. I didn't really start drinking coffee a lot until the last, I say, year and a half, maybe. I'm more of a tea drinker. I
okay.
prefer tea. But if I have to drink coffee, I prefer either coffee made from home. I'm not a Starbucks guy, and I love, 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 love 7-Eleven coffee. I don't know what
Why
it
is
is.
I have like a soft spot for 7-Eleven coffee too.
Yeah,
I mean, some of it is basically just sugar syrup, but
pretty
they
much.
actually have some pretty good black coffee, and
Oh, dude,
it's
the blueberry coffee. Oh,
okay. So you're a
yeah,
flavored coffee guy.
yeah, that's my favorite. It just the smell of it just draws me in. I gotta have it.
Do you drink it black or do you put cream and sugar in it?
Cream and sugar.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome, awesome. Um, well, today, thank you again for being here. You were telling me earlier that the kids are gone, the wife is working, uh, and we're here having a conversation. So,
yes.
uh, I let's kind of break the ice, get the mouth moving and all that stuff. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what are the important details about you, Daemein
Ooh.
Patterson? Maybe like it's that first paragraph on a resume.
Oh
But
my goodness.
plus some of like the more personal things. Maybe mention your wife and kids, and
Yeah.
those types of things.
Okay. Well, jeez. First paragraph on a resume. Good
Okay,
Lord.
I can do this. I can do this. Ready? Uh, you are a teacher at Grossmont High School. Where did
Yes.
you? Let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up, I was born in Newark, New Jersey. I was born and
Wow.
raised in Newark, New Jersey. Yeah, I know, right?
Okay.
Um, East Coast guy originally, but father's in the military. So
Okay.
we traveled around after a while, as I got older. We traveled around every 3 to 5 years. So, I mean, I've been all over the United States, you name it, I've lived there. Overseas, spent a lot of time in Japan before moving back to the States here, which a lot of my close friends we're still connected through, Japan.
Okay. That's really neat,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah. Uh,
can you tell me the story of New Jersey to San Diego? Like, give me just the bullet points. Like, so you traveled
yeah,
around. Your
yeah,
dad
yeah,
was in
yeah.
the military. How did you land here?
So New Jersey. I mean, first off, anybody who's East Coast, West Coast, there's always that discussion.
Sure.
And
West
the
Coast, best
difference,
coast.
yeah, the biggest difference I could say from East Coast, West Coast was the people. Initially, coming from East Coast to West Coast, people here, when I first got here, I noticed that people, you would stare a lot. I'm like, why is everybody staring at me? That was my biggest thing. Like, does it look all right? And, I didn't know. I didn't
Okay.
understand that.
Okay.
And my experience, not everyone's experience on the East Coast, you see people, hey, what's going on? How you doing? Say hi to people here. People kind of looked at that strange, like, you don't know me. Why are you talking to me? So that was something to get used to. Um, Biggest difference is the weather, obviously.
Okay.
San Diego, you can't go wrong with the weather. I'm used to four seasons, and then you come to San Diego. I don't know if we have exactly four seasons, or whatever you want to call it here. I say maybe two. Yeah,
Yeah, just like extreme versions, right? It's like
yeah,
we have coldish, cooler-ish, coolerish
yeah,
that's wet, and then we have hot, and then we have hotter, right?
yeah.
Like,
But
well, so when did you
mili-
come here? So you were
oh man,
like how long you been in San Diego?
since 1990.
Okay, so
Been here since 1990. So
so
this is home now. I mean, I'm
right.
I'm I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, and then when did you get married?
Oh my gosh,
She's
2000.
you said she's working. You said she was working.
She's working here. She's working here at the house.
Oh, okay,
She's working.
okay,
Yeah, she doesn't get
okay.
back to him. Yeah. So got married back in 2001.
Okay, so you've been married for 19 years this year.
Just about. Just about. Yeah.
That is crazy, man. So you come to San Diego. How old were you when you moved to San Diego?
Oh man, I was. Oh wow, it's that long ago. So 2000,
1990 is 30 years ago, by the way.
1990. Yeah. No, I'm just trying to think like what grade I was in because I came in the middle of sophomore year when I got to San Diego. I went to Morris High School over on Skyline.
Okay,
I was there, and I finished out there, graduated Morris High School, and
so you're
then
approximately 15.
yeah,
Yeah.
crazy.
Okay, Mr.
Wow,
Patterson,
I'm old, man.
I did not realize your age. I thought you were like closer to my age than anything else. All right, all
Oh,
right. I won't. I guess this is a weird feeling for me. I won't tell you how old I won't tell you what year I graduated high school. 2006.
no, it's all
Um,
right. Wow.
um, so okay, so you're in high school. You're moving all around. Like that's kind of your young life experience. You land in San Diego.
Right.
Obviously, San Diego is a huge military town. I'm guessing. Did you stayed here because I'm guessing your dad retired?
Yeah, he
Okay, so
retired here.
your dad retired here, and then you go to college. You're a teacher now, so you go to school.
Yes.
After high school, you graduate from Morris down on Skyline.
Yeah.
You go to you go to college. Where do you go to
Yeah.
college?
Started off at Southwestern, or actually City College. I did City College
Okay.
for a year, and decided to move over to Southwestern College. Finished up my AA there, and then
Okay.
transferred from Southwestern to Cal State San Marcos.
Alrighty.
At Cal State San Marcos is where I did my undergrad.
Okay.
Also got my teaching credential there, and then right after that, that's when I started teaching. And while I was teaching my first 2 years, I joined the master's program at Point Loma Nazarene.
Cool. So you have a master's and a teaching credential.
Yes, that's correct.
What's your master's in? Or what's your undergrad and what's your master's in?
My undergrad is in literature and writing, and then my master's is in education and technology. Believe it or not.
All right. And that's how we were able to survive the difficulties, the technical difficulties that we were
Seriously.
having getting in here. So you do this. Uh, Now you're a teacher at Grossmont.
Yes.
How did you land at Grossmont High School?
So after graduating from Cal State, I actually was offered a job up north with was it Mission Hills High School. Mission Hills High School offered me a position up there, and I had been making that commute throughout my credential process, and I'm
Right.
like, man, I don't want to make that drive every day. It's just just being on the road, anybody who drives a lot knows that's a lot of stress, just being on the road and then having to teach and then drive for, 40 minutes or whatever to get home. It was just something I wasn't ready to do. And so I turned that down. And within, I say, a couple of weeks of applying online, I got a call from Grossmont. And this is already, I say, 2 weeks into the school semester. They'd already started. And I got a call and was interviewed there and got hired.
So you've been at Grossmont this entire time.
Yes.
It's kind of my understanding that in the first few years after after you get your credential and all that type of stuff, you're like, you kind of bounce around a little bit before you land.
Right.
You've been blessed enough to be at Grossmont High School this entire time.
Absolutely. And you said the key word there, blessed. I mean, it's been a blessing being at Grossmont just for this long, but just being around the people that I've had the opportunity to work with and the students that I've had the opportunity to work with. Huge blessing.
So you've been at Grossmont High School for about 20 years.
Just about, yeah.
And so that's a pretty pivotal time of your life. That's when you get married. That's when you
Everything.
start. Dude, man, Y2K was crazy for you.
Oh man, it's been an adventure. I can say that it's been an adventure.
Well, awesome. Now you have two kids, two boys, right?
Yes.
What are their names again?
Aaron and Avery.
Aaron and Avery. Awesome.
Yeah. So all A's. My wife's Anna, son's Aaron and Avery, and I'm the odd man out, Daemein. I get the D's. So, yeah.
Hey, there you go, man. Excellent, excellent. So that's your journey to education. You're an English teacher. Do you have a more specific title at Grossmont High School?
I don't know. I've been teaching English, from the beginning. I also am the EL coordinator there. I've been working with the EL program, the English
EL.
learner program for
What is EL?
English learners. There have
Okay,
been so
okay.
many acronyms throughout the years: ESL, EL. So, but I work with a lot of the immigrant students from all over the world. I have students from Russia, from China, Africa, Syria, Iraq, you name it.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it is.
That is so cool. I think I've been at Grossmont High School for about 5 years now, in a
Yes.
far more limited capacity than obviously, but I gain more and more respect for Grossmont the more time I spend there. Honestly, with every high school, I gain more respect for it, obviously. But
Yes.
it's cool to hear some of those programs that they've got going on there. So, um, you're a family man. You you're a family man. You're an English teacher. You got a wife, a beautiful wife and kids. I've met them. They're wonderful.
Thank
Uh,
you.
and just can you tell me a little bit about your, like, briefly, just about your faith journey, about your how you came to the Lord,
Yeah.
maybe, what you do in the church you're involved
Mm.
in, etc.
Sure. Um, my journey in the church. I mean, I've been in church all my life, from a kid till now. My grandmother has always raised us in the church. Parents have always taken us to church, and my dad became a pastor when we lived in Japan many years ago,
Okay.
and that is where I actually first gave my life to the Lord, was in Japan, and been a believer ever since. My role in the church, I've done everything from, oh my gosh,
When you're a
been in the,
when you're a pastor's kid, you've done it all,
you know,
right?
well, you don't have a choice
Right.
initially, right?
It's like, hey, we're gonna
But
go to the office, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do chores for a
okay,
while, right? Like,
right,
I'm looking forward to
yeah,
my son being old enough to do that for me.
there you go. But I mean, I've been, children's choir, Sunday school teacher,
Hmm.
youth ministry, praise and worship team, which is what I'm a part of now. I handle the praise and worship, and I work with the youth program as well at my church. So a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Um, I think I think it's just time to kind of dive into it. Um,
Sure.
like I think we've touched on a couple of things. Let me do some things for the chat. Chat.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, this is intended to be interactive, so please post your questions in chat. Try to work them in as best as we can. Mr. Patterson, Daemein. I mean, there's so many nicknames he goes by, but he and I talked, and we're excited to kind of facilitate some of those questions as we hear his story. Uh, Daemein, one of the things that is obvious, and there's a lot of hurting going on in this nation right now. A lot, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of like when you rip a scab off of a wound, right?
Mm,
Where it's like, it was functioning before, but now it's bleeding again, right?
right.
Um, and there's a lot of pain and hurt that is coming to the surface. There's a lot of things that need to change. There's a lot of, uh, frankly, racism that our country is having to face head on.
For sure.
For me, my calling and what I feel from the Lord as a white pastor in San Diego is to platform my Black American brothers and let them hear their voice and let people hear your voice and kind of just process your experiences and those types of things. I think it makes things a lot more personal. And then when I was kind of just checking on you, I mean, I would consider us friends as well.
Right.
And I saw your video. You posted a song on
Oh yeah.
Facebook,
Oh yeah.
and we talked about it a little bit. And you were like, "Man, I just feel like God's calling me to use my voice," and
Absolutely.
uh, and now here we are, right? Light bulb goes off in my head, light bulb goes off in your head.
Right.
Now we're here.
We're
So
talking about how quickly God works, right?
it's incredible. It's like I've heard it once said, when God, when you say, "Hey God, use me," like I
Hmm.
surrender to you, get ready, because you're about to
Right.
get used,
Right.
right? When you are like humbly following God and say, "God, use me in whatever capacity you have for me." He doesn't like, okay, I'll put you on the wait list and I'll call you in a couple years. He's like, all right, let's go.
Right.
Let's go. And I love that. So we were talking, and you're like, I feel like God's calling me to use my voice. So
Yeah.
there's a myriad of topics that we could touch. There
For
are
sure.
so many things that we could touch on this morning. I just want to, I guess we'll just start off with like, how are you doing with everything?
Doing well overall. Like you and I discussed, I was sitting here one night just kind of looking through my feed on Facebook, watching some things on the news, and you know, contemplating like, God, I know that there's something I should be doing. And I was watching and listening to friends who were like, hey, we're going out to protest, family members, colleagues, all kinds of things were going on. And I'm all about being a part of the change. There's a lot
Yeah.
of people who do a lot of talking, but I'm about being part of the change. But I also want to listen to God's voice and what He wants me to do, because it's easy to be very eager and passionate about something and just run.
Yeah.
I always use the analogy with some of my students, or even with my kids. Sometimes, like, stop, there's a snake, and most people would just take off and run when they hear snake, right? And run right towards the snake and get bitten. But I want to make sure that I pause and listen to God's voice and understand what direction He wants me to go, if that makes any sense, versus just running. And I prayed about it, and I said, God, what is it that you want me to do? Do I need to go out and protest? Do I need to do this or that? And He said, simply, just use your voice.
Yeah.
And that's where I posted the song. Um, that was my initial response, was to post the song, to use my voice in that way. But I felt like that was just the beginning of
Yeah.
what He wants me to do.
Man, I have so much respect for you because I think in my life I've learned hmm, I have to gather my thoughts. I need to let more of this coffee sit in.
Mm,
In my life I've been one to be a lot like Peter, right? Oh Lord, I'm not going to deny you, right? Or like I'm going to make a big hasty promise in some sort of
right.
flight of emotion. And I've had to learn in my life to pause, take a step back, assess my emotions,
Hmm.
assess all the different stimulus, right?
For sure.
And balance that with God's word, balance that with the tools He's given us to analyze, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
and then make the appropriate step.
And that's
And
not an easy thing to do. I mean, it's really not. It's something that you have to be conscious of, and something that you have to work on. It doesn't just happen.
Right.
But it's a process. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
I think it's huge, and I think that in a lot of stuff, again, we've been impassioned with a lot of things in our culture today, in our society today, um,
Absolutely.
and it's quick to jump to kind of this mob mentality. But I appreciate that you're stopping, you're taking the time, and and carefully proceeding. I want to ask you. You'd mentioned using your voice. You wrote a song for that.
Yes.
You had friends who were calling you to protest. There's people who are, you know, there's so many things. Change your profile picture to a black box.
Right.
Uh, you know, listen to these voices, like all these different things as you've been exploring the space of using your voice as a well seasoned teacher, as a well seasoned man of God, a person of multiple diverse cultures. I that you've lived in, also as a Black American,
Mm.
of what, how is that starting to manifest itself a little bit?
Well, I think I've been blessed with the ability of perspective. Like you were mentioning, because of my background, because of the fact that I've traveled a lot, and I'm not saying this to sound arrogant, but just because I've had that opportunity, I've had exposure to many different cultures and many different walks of life and different types of people. So I've had an opportunity to adjust my thinking and the way that
Right.
I live. And not to say that my experience is better or worse, it's just different. And I think I'm able to bring those experiences to my teaching, those experiences to um, my voice when I do speak and have these conversations with individuals. Like we're having this conversation now, I have that perspective that I can bring in. And that's an awesome opportunity. Not everybody gets that. Some people grow up in the same neighborhood all their lives and they never travel. They grow up around the same people all their lives and never have any interactions with, or limited interactions with different races of people. And to me, that's a huge disadvantage. I think my kids are blessed, my sons, because we try to expose them to everything. Even when we travel, we take them with us. We expose them to different music, different movies, different cultures, everything, with the idea, knowing that they're going to be better off in the long run because they've been exposed to those things. So I'm very fortunate. I thank my parents for raising me in that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe this might be the right time. I've been at the end. I was hoping to ask you about maybe some action steps and some different things that were coming up for you.
Yes.
But maybe right now might be a good time to ask you, like, if you were advising a youth, like how to respond to uh, the chaos. I mean, because
Right.
it's not just racism.
No.
I think when we look at uh, what's going on, like in our world,
Mhm.
yes, racism is there. Yes, racism exists and has existed in far stronger capacities in the past. Um,
Yes.
but there's a lot of other things going on too. There's heart issues. Like, honestly, people need a relationship with the Lord. And we need to fix
Agreed.
the sin issue in our hearts. There's the
Yes.
stress of COVID. There's the stress of peer pressure from, from if for high schoolers like. There's just so many things. I think even social media is very one-sided part of the racism conversation too, right? It's
Yeah.
the things that kind of get viral and those types of things over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how would you advise a student today to navigate these really murky waters?
First thing I would say is just to kind of like we were just discussing, to pause and think, because especially with students and even many adults, we're very emotional beings, right? We're emotional
Mm-hmm.
creatures. And, if something impacts me in a way where I feel, if I get offended or I feel embarrassed, we want to react emotionally quickly, but we should always pause and think about what we want to do, what the purpose is behind what we do. So, there are people who are criticizing those who are out looting and destroying property. Not that I'm condoning that, yet
Mm-hmm.
we should always have an understanding of why people do what they do. Like even when we talk about racism, my son and I, we were watching. My wife and I, we like to watch the ID channel, like cold case files and things like
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But one of the episodes, there was a group of black men who had robbed a convenience store, and after they robbed the convenience store, they went on kind of like this killing spree. And one of the things they did, they were switching cars and carjacking, and they went to a gas station, and for no apparent reason, just they needed a new car, so they shot a guy who happened to be white, walked up to him, just shot him, and took his car. He survived that, and then he was kind of dialoguing at the end of the show and talking about how he sees these individuals. And I pointed to my son. I said, so we have to understand his perspective. He might be racist, or he might have a certain opinion about black men, but based on his experience with these particular black men, you have an understanding of why he might feel that way. And
Right.
I think that's a lot of the conversation that needs to happen. Well, why are people racist? Why are people against this or against that? When we understand the reasons behind it, we don't have to agree with necessarily, but we do have to have an understanding. And that's how I start my school year. Before we get into any of the curriculum and books and vocabulary, we always talk about perspective. I say, hey, in this classroom, we're going to learn a lot about culture and about race and about sex and about all these different things that might not be what you're used to talking about, or maybe makes you feel uncomfortable. But first, I want you to look inside first.
Right.
Decide, why does this make me feel uncomfortable? Is it because I've been a part of that? We talk about comedians. When we look at comedians, and everybody's guilty of this. I've watched comedians for years that talk about race and they joke about it and we laugh. It's hilarious. But if that were to happen on the street or something like that, we're offended. We're ready to defend ourselves and fight.
Mm-hmm.
We have a conversation in my classroom when I teach about the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, and we do a 4-day lesson on language and the language that we use. And we talk about words like pejoratives and things that people say to each other when girls call each other the B word and black people call each other the N word. And we do all these things. Well, why is that okay for you to do that with your friend? But if someone else were to call you that, you'd be ready to fight. Oh, it's okay. She's my friend. We understand. No, it's not okay, because you just given someone else who's not your friend, who's watching this interaction with you and your friend, permission to do these things. But we rarely consider those things, right? We rarely consider that. So
I think what you said, so many good things there.
sorry.
No, it's good. I'm like, I was like, oh, mental note on understanding people, right? And like seeking like that everyone does have a perspective, and that's developed, whether that's intentional or not, right? The language that we use and how that affects how we look at the world, how we interact with people, all those types of things. And on top of that, then also developing understanding in future generations, with your son and with your and those types of things. There's so many good nuggets to unpack there. I think to hone in a little bit. You're an English teacher.
Yes.
I walk into your classroom and I see all the powerful rhetoric on your walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have books on display, right? And that's not in all teachers' classrooms. But you have like books on display, like showing the value of a book, right? Whether that's intentional or not. You have Lakers banners showing your allegiances, right, to your sports teams. You have Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King and Maxwell, posters.
Yes.
Influential black men on your walls, along with and like you just said, along with influential white people on your walls. You have
That's
different
right.
cultures. You advertise your trips to overseas that you're taking youth on your walls, right? Like there's so much conversation and dialogue around us. I think you offer a really interesting perspective because you come from that, right? And you come from that. You've been plugged in all across America and all across the world. And how how would you say, uh, if a student was like, I want to gain more perspective? So I'm thinking of maybe it's the white student, right? Who's like,
Okay.
I've kind of grown up in this little bubble, and how I want to gain more perspective, but a lot of the perspective I see on Instagram or on Facebook, but the students aren't really doing Facebook these days, but
Right.
like but like
That's for old people now.
right, all Twitter, Facebook, all this stuff is in some regards kind of very like angry rhetoric,
Okay.
and it's very emotionally driven and those types of things.
Yeah.
If you're a student who wants to develop this diverse worldview, like I if you how would you develop that? How would you encourage a student to maybe step out of the culture that they're in, whether it's
Mhm.
white, whether it's Mexican, whether it's Persian, whether it's black, right? To gain more understanding of the world around them.
First, as an educator, I would obviously I would say education is key. You have to educate yourself. You can't just take one perspective, you know, going back to what I was saying about the Jewish Holocaust,
Yeah.
you have to look at all sides. I've gone as far as having a Holocaust survivor come in our class and share their experience, as well as having someone who was German from Germany come in and share their perspective living through that time. It was a grandfather who came in and shared his perspective. So we have to see both sides and what he was being forced to do, whether he wanted to do or not, in the protection of his family and things like that. So I think that's part of what they should do. If I was giving them any
Right.
advice, is be willing to look at both sides and just be willing to have the conversation. I think for so long, just like if you hold something in, like if you're in a bad relationship and instead of having a discussion about it or talking about that relationship, if I'm having issues with my wife, I don't like something that she does, but I never say anything, and then one day it just blows up and I'm mad about that situation, but it manifests itself in another way. I think that's how racism is in many cases. People are afraid to have the conversation or choose not to have the conversation, and so when it does come out, it comes out in these violent ways or these ways where we're clashing,
Mm-hmm.
versus you and I here, like we're having a conversation about it, and that's okay. You know,
Right.
I encourage my students all the time in class. We're going to discuss things in class that you're not going to agree with. I'm going to share an opinion based on my experience that you're not going to agree with, but that's okay. You don't have to agree with me, but at the very least, you should understand where I'm coming from, and vice versa. I should be able to listen to you and understand your experience and where you're coming from, and we can still continue to live and grow. And I think that's the initial thing that we have to do, is to have a conversation about it. Um, Other than that, be willing to be a part of the change. Be willing to be a part of the change. I
Mm-hmm.
see so many. We're talking about social media. People that I've come to call friends, and they're posting things, and I feel like the things that they post are just, you know, there's no purpose behind it. There's no agenda behind it. They're just throwing things out there to see who bites and what happens, versus like, okay, I'm putting this out there, but my purpose in putting this out there is so that we can have a conversation about it. Or my purpose in putting this out there is so that I can make a change. Me saying I want to use my voice, it's great. I post that song, and that's one way I do it. But I also have to continue to teach my students in class, continue to educate my kids at home,
Right.
continue when I have these opportunities to speak about these issues, to do that. I have to be willing to be a part of the change.
I think that kind of what you were saying was ringing bells about what you were saying before, right? It's intentionality and intentionality in seeking understanding, right?
Yes.
You might not make the same decision set given that, but I think
Right.
that part of you brought up the Holocaust survivors, right? Both
Yes.
on the German side and the Jewish side. Obviously, it's a horrible atrocity that happened to specifically Jewish people, but a specific looking type of person. We know
Right. Right.
a
Right.
lot of Poles were uh,
Absolutely.
persecuted along with more. But then on top of that, you have the German soldier who is like, I'm gonna die, like I'm gonna get killed if I don't obey these orders, right? Like,
Or my family. Right.
right, like or there's going to be severe consequences for me and my family and my friends and those types of things if I don't obey.
Right.
So it's like, well, now you have you have this really tough moral question
So,
uh, that I think creates that understanding, right? Where it's like, man, I was in a tough spot and you were in a tough spot. Yes, there were different tough spots, but we
right.
understand each other now. I wanted to use this time actually to help gain perspective. It's kind of more of a public conversation between you and I right now.
Right. Right.
We have people who are watching in the stream. Again, I want to say,
Great.
if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. I think they'll be really good for that. I want to hear your perspective a little bit. I want to hear your perspective as a black man in America,
Okay.
or as a black educator. Uh, Kind of the two buckets I'd like to spend some time in,
Yeah.
um, is your personal story,
Yes.
uh, maybe some of the things, some of the racism and some of those difficulties that you've learned or that you've experienced, and those types of things. We had a guest on last week who grew up in Southeast San Diego,
Yeah.
and another UIC guy, and by some sort of affiliation. But he grew up in Southeast San Diego and was sharing how when he sees a cop, he has a certain reaction to it, and he that's when he decides,
Absolutely.
like, just because of the color of his skin, like, he's like, I can be dressed well, but like the color of my
Absolutely.
skin, I'm gonna pull into the 7-Eleven or the liquor store, and I'm gonna wait it out a little bit,
Right.
or he shared he had a gun pulled on him, and like those types of things.
Right.
uh, I think it's important to hear kind of like your background, right?
Okay.
As a white person, I've grown up with a certain level of privilege, uh, a certain level of almost like societal forgiveness, for lack of a better
Hmm.
term, right? Like,
Okay.
I'm given the benefit of the doubt a lot. I'd love to hear your story, and then I'd also love to hear your perspective. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket
Okay.
would be your perspective on racism at the high school age in the high schools,
Okay.
and like just kind of what you experienced there. So, uh, pick a bucket and let's go.
Sweet. So, bucket number one, my personal experience is it it varies, and I'd like to start off by saying, my spirit, it is personal. It is a
Right.
personal experience. So, lumping, all black experience together would be incorrect. I know
Right.
that because of the color of my skin, I do share some experiences, but there are a lot of people that will hear me share what I'm about to share now and say, well, I've had the whole experience. Well, oh, you're not black enough, or you're not this, you're not that.
Right.
So I'll get into that in a minute. But um, because my parents raised us a certain way, we grew up originally in Newark, New Jersey. Um, Not the best neighborhood, but from my perspective growing up, there was a lot of things that I didn't see. I was still young, still naive. A lot of my parents sheltered us from a lot of things. I've seen, things. I've seen my uncle being chased in the street. My uncle coming home with a broken jaw, being hit with a bat. His jaw wired shut.
Wow.
I've experienced, as a kid, my uncle driving us out to go get something to eat at at a fast food restaurant or pick up something and being pulled over by the police for absolutely no reason and being held there. And, just so I remember all of those bits and pieces as a child, but I never still fully processed any of that
Okay.
until I was older and experienced these things for myself. And so, growing up, my dad's a pastor, as you know
Hmm.
now. So my experience is going to be quite different than most. I always think, I didn't grow up poor, but my parents talk about, they're like, no, we were poor. Like
Right.
we didn't
Right.
have a lot. You just didn't know that we didn't have a lot. So they sheltered us from a lot of that stuff. But in my experience, to most, I was very, very fortunate. My parents made sure that we all were always provided for, and we never lacked as far as food and clothing and things like that. So I never felt like we suffered in that regard. Yet traveling around, I remember we lived in Maine,
Okay.
And I
We've
remember
literally been in the
having,
two corners of America, or like at
right?
least the continental America.
I remember living in Maine and standing outside waiting for the bus to pick us up for school. And, the bus driver seeing us walk down the driveway, two black kids, my sister and I, walking down the driveway and just driving by and just, and I know he saw us, but he would still do that. And my mom having to hop in the car and drive us all the way to school in the middle of the snow, all kinds of, crazy stuff like that. Little bits stick out to me. And then, our experience living over in Japan and then coming back to the States. I remember, when I first went to Morris High School, a lot of people, because I spoke proper English or whatever you want to say, people would, oh
Sure.
man, you're so whitewashed, or you're this, you're that, and or you talk white. I'm like, well, what does that mean? I never
You're
understood
like,
that.
I'm
Or
from the East Coast and Japan. Like I'm in
yeah,
San
yeah,
Diego
just like,
now. I'm in the middle.
so just so many different experiences. And I'm kind of hitting snapshots. These are things that just stand out in my mind.
Use your voice,
But
brother.
I remember Cal State San Marcos University, and this is nothing against the university at all. So please don't take that as that. But being the only black male in the teaching credential program at the time, the only one, and sitting in a classroom one night, and conversation came up about racism and about being black, and without, I think, people even recognizing that they did that, half of the classroom turning around and looking at me, waiting for me to respond. And I was like, whoa, those moments really hit me. And I was like, wow, that just happened. Um, Fast forward to, working at Grossmont, and again, not at the time being a new teacher, just excited about having a job, and going to a staff meeting one day and having a colleague put their arm around me and say, hey, did you know that you were the first and only black teacher here at Grossmont High School ever? I'm like, no, didn't know that, but thank you for pointing that out. And
Wow.
I remember that not being something I was even thinking about when I became a teacher. But then as years have gone on, just understanding that, that responsibility, and that people actually see that, and people look at that walking around in the hallways and seeing students and look at me, hey, Mr. P, hey, the black teacher. Like, I've had students say that, and students that are not
Wow.
even in my class, but they recognize that I'm the black teacher on campus. And that's just, I was like, wow, okay. And then taking that in, and understanding that, I'm not just a teacher here at Grossmont High School.
Right.
But I am a black teacher at Grossmont, and that means something. Whether I acknowledge that or not, that means something to a lot of people here.
Hmm.
And I have to recognize that. That has to matter to me. And going again, my personal experience, some things that I've experienced outside of my profession, I guess, would be, I have three instances that pop out in my mind when
Go
people
for
talk
it.
about, racial profiling and things like that. My son was early on, he was still young. He had got pneumonia once, and
Okay.
we had to take him to the hospital one night. It was pretty late, and I think it was around 11:30 at night. My wife was hungry. Cafeteria in the hospital closed down. She's like, can you go grab me a bite to eat? So I said, I'll be back. I'll run out and grab you something to eat. Hopped in the car, and literally within a minute from pulling out from the hospital parking lot, I was pulled over. I said, okay, maybe I didn't have my lights on or something. I was tired. Who knows what was going on? It
Hmm.
was a stressful day. Officer walks up to the window. He says, hey, license and registration. Had that ready, handed it to him. Said, officer, why'd you pull me over? Give me a second. Goes back to his car, and I assume he was checking to see if I had any record, any
Right.
tickets, outstanding warrants, whatever. He proceeded to sit in his car, the big light shining on my car, got me pulled over on the side of the road for about 35, maybe 40 minutes, just sitting, and sitting. Comes back to the car, hands me my license and registrations, and says, have a nice day, or have a good night, and then drives off. And I was so angry because I knew what it was. I was
Right.
so angry, and I just trying to process that. And so I just sat there for another 5 minutes, just like kind of angry, and wanting to do something, wanting to scream, wanting to yell. And I've always experienced that personally, like just myself, either in the car or even when my wife and I were dating. We've been pulled over many times for various reasons. Officers pulling me over. Well, what kind of modifications do you have in your car? Your car seems pretty loud, and some guy flying by in a souped up muscle car, and I'm like, okay. I said, what about
Wait.
that, officer? Things like that. But then to have my kids experience that, I've always taught them to respect the authority, respect police officers and stuff like that. Not because, and I might get flack for this, not necessarily just because they're police officers, but just learning to respect authority and
Right.
not be confrontational just because some people get that, they get pulled over and they immediately get confrontational without an understanding of why they're being pulled over, or even if they know why they're being pulled over because they're black, but still
Mm-hmm.
understanding how to deal with situations and de-escalate the situation. But we were here over in Santee one evening. We had just left the high school football game. I think it was homecoming one year,
Okay.
and my kids' friends were with us, and we were taking them home. They lived over in the Santee area here in San Diego, and we drove them, dropped them off. I think it was around 10:30 at night after the game, and said goodnight. Drove away from their apartment, and by the time we turned the corner, it already had a police officer following me. And I said, okay, hey guys, there's a cop following us. He's going to pull us over. Just relax, be quiet. I haven't done anything wrong. Let me handle it. My wife's sitting next to me, and kids in the back. Like, why would he pull you over, Dad? Just relax. I'll take care of it.
Right.
And sure enough, within a minute, he pulled over to the side of the road, rolled my window down again, had my license and registration ready. Um, Soon after that, another cop car pulls up on the other side. So now they're kind of surrounding my truck. And I roll the window down. Hey, officer, how you doing? Hey, what are you doing? So just dropping off my kids' friends. We're just coming from a football game over at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
Gave him my license registration. He takes it back again, taking his time, trying to see if I had a record, any outstanding warrants, whatnot. And I guess realizing who I was, maybe he saw that I was a teacher. No record, no
Right.
outstanding warrants, whatever, came back. And then the other officers came around the car. And then they got really friendly all of a sudden. They were like, well, hey, you know what? I found these coupons in my car for, free Slurpees at 7-Eleven. Maybe your kids want these. And I'm like, no, we're okay, but I appreciate the offer and whatnot. And again, I'm angry because I know
Right.
I've been stopped. And so I asked him, I said, officer, is there any reason why you stopped me? He's like, well, your tail light is out. I said, no, both of them were working. I'm pretty sure. I'm a car guy. I check on these things regularly.
Yeah.
But he mentioned the bar. Trucks, SUVs have the
Right.
little brake light at the top on the bar
Mm-hmm.
of the trunk bed or whatever it is, the lift. And he said that was out. Now, knowing the law, having many friends in law enforcement, I know that that's more of a decoration. As long as you have your actual brake lights working, they're intact. That's that's not necessary. You don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get into that conversation with him, but again, understanding where I was, time of night, skin color, got my kids in the back, my wife in the car. I said, okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. He's like, well, make sure you get that fixed. And then he proceeded to offer us an escort that we needed. I don't know why, to the freeway. He's like, you know where the freeway is from here? Yeah, I know exactly where I am. Lived in San Diego for many years now. So experiences like that, it's a thing. It happens. To ignore that, like I said in my video that I posted on Facebook in the song, to sit here and ignore racism would be crazy, because it does exist, and it exists in different ways and different forms. Maybe it's more hidden, but who knows? But it's there, and it's important to again recognize it and to have those conversations. So that's my personal experience. So those are
Yeah.
just
I mean,
highlights.
for those who are listening who might not be from San Diego, Santee is notoriously white. Um, I hate to say it, but I think we need to start. Uh, we need to start being really honest and calling these things out. People growing up used to call it clan tea because it was so white, um, and I and then the other part is like my heart breaks, man. Like I don't think I've ever sat for 30 minutes being pulled over. Like even if I've been cited, right?
Right.
I've gotten one speeding ticket. It was when I was in college. I was driving less than a mile to the pizza shop, and I just didn't brake enough down a hill, right? Like it was.
Yeah.
I've gotten one speeding ticket. That whole interaction took 15 minutes tops. You know, there was a point in my life. I shared this with James. There was a point in my life where over the course of 2 weeks, I got pulled over 4 times.
Oh, wow.
I kind of had a janky truck at the time. Like, two of the times were tail light and which actually ended up being out, and a deflated tire. But the other 2 times were just it was late at night and that kind of thing.
All right.
But like none of those experiences was I ever like, okay, this is what's happening. It was there's that trigger in me that was, I must have done something wrong. But I think what you're describing, which is like so important, and what I've heard echoed time and time and time again from so many black friends of mine, is as we've had these conversations, is that the you're you're living your life automatically as a suspect, right? And like that sucks. Like my heart gets, I am boiling hearing these stories, but it's important for me, and it's important for us, for fellow white people, and for just people in general, right? To like hear these stories and be like,
For sure.
man, that is not a way to live. Like that is not healthy. And I, like, on one hand, like I want to say I'm sorry, like, but like there isn't much I can do. Like I can't change this other than having these conversations and like trying to get people to gain perspective. Like James last week, and I don't know if this resonates with you at all, but like he was saying like he doesn't like going to stores and like walking in and then like realizing they don't have what you need and then having to walk out because he like, have you felt like that kind of thing before where it's like
I'm laughing because I absolutely understand that.
like for me, and like I shared with him, I was like, I'm the guy who like on a road trip, like if I have to do a bathroom break, I hate going to a fast food spot, using the bathroom and walking out. Like I'll buy a thing, right? But like that's like the closest thing I've ever come to. But I can't think of the amount of times I've been like, hey, I'm gonna go try Walmart for this thing, and I go walk through the Walmart. Oh, they don't have it. They don't have a kiddie pool or whatever. Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna go try Target. Walk through. I've never like, okay, there's a security guard following me out. Like it's just not a thing. But I mean, just by the way you're laughing, it sounds like that's kind of a thing. Like,
yeah, and sometimes it's not. It's just it's always in the back of your mind. I can't explain it. I don't know what it is. I have a term for it, but it's probably. It's not appropriate. It's another term, but it's like a spidey sense, but for black people. So it's like I really just, so like you were mentioning James and he was sharing his experience, and I had a chance to watch some of that too.
Right.
But that sense where he felt like, he sees a cop and he's like, well, I'm going to go and pull over into the 7-Eleven here and just wait it out. When that incident that happened in Santee that night, we were dropping off my son's friends. I was telling my wife, like she went to walk the boys up to drop them off at the apartment. I'm sitting in the truck. I'm like, hey, we got to go. Like we've overstayed our limit already. I'm saying this out loud to myself. I'm like, we've been here too long. We need to go. So I already felt it before I even got pulled over. And that's sad that I have to even think that way, but I knew it.
And that's the unfortunate truth. I've been trying to talk to people, like, again, fellow white friends who, like, aren't blessed enough to have these conversations regularly. Because honestly, this is a blessing to me, right? This helps me tune my how to talk to white people about this stuff conversation, right? Like, I
think this helps us all, man. This is for everyone. This is for all of us.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I saw a meme that was like, I'm tired of hearing white privilege. And there's some really terrible rhetoric that was attached to it. He was like, It was basically white privilege has become the N word for white people, and I was like, hold up,
Wow.
let's have a conversation about this. And like, so
Definitely.
I started talking to him about it, and what I realized is that, um, you know, people of all races have people of all skin colors have difficulties, right?
Absolutely.
My ancestors are Native American, as far as we know. My grandpa was adopted, but are like Native American and like Prussian immigrant potato farmers.
Wow.
Like we've had some tough stuff in our life,
For
right?
sure.
Uh, but that we can say like I've had some tough stuff growing up, right?
Right.
But what we need to realize is that it could have the extra layer of me walking around as a suspect, right?
Right.
Of me walking around as like not being able to go into a store and walk out and feel like I've they suspect me for stealing something, right?
Right.
Or like I don't have that timer in neighborhoods other than that might be a little bit more sketchy, right? That's
Hmm.
like, like this is just a part of town like I can't be in, right, for
Right.
very
And then
long,
don't get
right?
me right. Yeah, don't get me wrong too. I mean, I've been in black neighborhoods where I'm like, hey, babe, we need
Right.
to go. Like this is, I know this is, we've overstayed our welcome. So it,
Right,
yeah,
right. But there's like, if we're calculating the amount of square miles that is in San Diego for me, as it is for you, it's far more for you, right? Unfortunately, and that's where I'm for me like part of these discussions for people is like, look, like it's not that I did anything to earn my ivory skin, right?
right.
Um, like, but I have to recognize that there is an extra obstacle, especially here in America, um, to being a minority
Right.
because there's a benefit that comes with, for some reason, the adopted culture of America is white English speaking, right? Like, and that's unfortunate. But I don't. You have to get that perspective and that understanding, like we were saying before, to understand that it is a place of privilege, right?
Yes.
Like and it doesn't mean like that's not to invalidate difficulties that you've had. It's a
Yeah.
place of privilege just because like we're starting at slightly different spots, right?
Hmm.
Like there's uh, there's not the extra layer that we have to go through that has to do with race,
Yeah.
and the color of our skin. And I think that's so important for white people to recognize. And I think it's also like not to say that I want to advocate for white struggle or anything
Hmm.
here, but like that's an important thing for black people to recognize and all people to recognize, right? Is that people do struggle, just
Yes.
when we're talking about racism and specifically Black Lives Matter, right? Like,
Hmm.
and the movement behind that, not necessarily the organization, because I think there's a lot of things with the organization that most of the black people that I've talked to aren't huge fans of, right?
Right. Okay.
But the reality is right now, there's a huge conversation on the struggle of black people in America,
Yeah.
specifically racism of black people in America, and we like we're addressing that right now, right? That's
And
saying
that's okay.
right.
And that's okay to address it,
We
right?
should address it as
To acknowledge it.
Christians. As Christians, we should be addressing these difficult things. Um, saying Black Lives Matter isn't saying trafficked lives don't matter, right?
Right.
Or isn't saying unborn lives don't matter, right? Or isn't saying uh, poverty or orphans' lives matter or don't matter, right?
Right.
Like by saying the positive for one thing, we're not saying the negative for the other, right?
Right.
And just right now, this is a focus. There's momentum here,
Hmm.
and like for me personally, I want to encourage all white people listening to this, have the conversations, gain the perspective. As you gain perspective, you can talk to your white friends who might not have that perspective. Start connecting, be bridge builders. If as soon as we can start creating more ties where injustice towards a minority person uh, in this case specifically, a black person, right? The spark
Right.
of it all was George Floyd, but there's 400 years of injustice built up behind that. It's literally the
Absolutely.
straw that broke the camel's back, or the spark that started the fire, right?
Right.
Um, at least for right now.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
that's important to note too. I feel like people keep, I, I say people that I know are putting out information that, he was a deadbeat dad and he was this and he was that. He had a criminal record. Okay, that's fine, but we all have a past that still
mhm.
doesn't justify what happened to him. So be willing to admit that, or at least acknowledge that.
Right.
His past had nothing to do with what happened to him, or very it had something to do with what happened to him, because some people are like, well, he was a criminal, that's why he was in the place that he was in. Again, still does not validate how he was killed.
And what we have to recognize is that basically the uh, even if there were crimes, the crimes didn't fit the punishment, right?
Yeah.
The punishment was the cost of his life,
Right.
right? The crimes were that someone who wasn't part of the justice system, right? The people who are supposed to sort out the crimes that you have to pay for and how you pay for them, basically,
Mm-hmm.
they were taken out of the equation, right? And that's a form of checks and balances we have here in America that that isn't like the same sheriff as the judge, right? Like
Yeah.
we have these different people and these different voices, and that's really what we need to do is we need to become so intertwined with each other that when Daemein Patterson is hurting, or Daemein Patterson's mom and dad or cousin or even just friend are hurting, right? That we feel it and that we get on our knees and we pray, right? Like that we are an agent of change regard whoever is connected with that person, right? And
Right.
as we start building these connections and these bridges, as we have this conversation, and then someone watches this in the Twitch chat, and then and then that person who watches it has a discussion with their sibling or whatever that might have some inherent racism that they haven't addressed yet. Like
Right.
this is part of us all becoming interconnected, and that's so important.
And I'm glad you bring out that point too, because I think within every community, within every group of people, with every race, whatever, there is racism.
Right.
Yes, like you said, the focus is now the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's what we're focusing on. But being able to understand that even when we have these conversations, when I have these conversations with my kids, I point out examples of things that maybe we have done that have been racist, things
Mm-hmm.
that we've laughed at or joked about and things like that, and saying, know what, that's not okay either. So it's not just because I'm black, that's what we're only going to focus on. We're going to focus on other forms of racism as well too. Racism in general is
Right.
wrong. So, I want to make sure that my kids understand that.
I think we could go for so long, and we had mentioned the length of this conversation earlier this week, and I don't want to go too long. And I think maybe at a later time we can have a more in depth conversation. I'd love to have you back, and that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
whatever. I'm
Um,
game. I have a clear schedule, fortunately.
oh,
So,
sweet.
yeah,
Well, then I have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
absolutely.
Um, the first thing, and again, this is a whole other can of worms and something that we
Yeah.
can address later, but but like something that I've been convicted of recently is like positive racism, right? Complimenting an Asian person because they're good at math, right? Or
Yeah.
a black person because they're good at sports, right? Like compliment them because they're good at the thing. Don't just assume that the person is good at the thing because of their skin color,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like and like that's one of the things where it's like we just have to like just a small tweak in our thinking, right? Like
Yes.
like a white person, we can't just assume that because they wear nice clothes. It's not necessarily racism, maybe, but like if a white person's wearing nice clothes, we don't
Hmm.
just assume that they have money, right?
Right.
Like they might have struggled and fought to have that nice car or that nice piece of clothing, or similarly, like just because you're a black man with big muscles, that doesn't mean you run fast, right? But like
Right.
we can't assume that, right? And that's one of the positive steps that we can take in our minds, which is to like assess the individual, not the
Absolutely.
group of individuals based
Yeah.
off of their skin color, right? If everyone's wearing
Stereotype.
football jerseys and look like the football team from Grossmont High School, okay, they're probably fast and pretty strong, right? Like, if a college football team walks in here and it's like, oh, you're clearly a football team together, well then
Mhm.
there might be some assessments, but notice that that's not a color based assessment. That's
Right.
based off of what they're doing and what they're saying and what they're like how they're acting and like those types of things. So it's like so I think it's so important for us to do these things and identify even the things that we've let slide,
Right.
right? Um, Identify the things that we've let slide, like complimenting someone based off the generalization of their skin color, right?
Yes.
Um, I wanted to ask you this because uh, I do want these conversations to be informative for the people who are listening and those types of things. And
Okay.
I've been talking a lot. I need to step out of the way.
Same. I'm sorry, I keep
Wait,
rambling. I feel
but
like I'm
no, but
rambling a lot.
it's your voice we want to hear. Um, I wanted to ask you about uh, racism and race relations and race issues and those types of things, specifically amongst high schoolers in the high schooler camp, like
Right.
on the high school campuses.
Okay.
Um, you mentioned you're like, man, I even hate to say it, and it was in my, it's like it's in my head, but you're like the token black teacher, right? Like
Yes.
you're the guy.
Yeah.
And I hate that even exists, right? It should just, but you're the guy, and I'd imagine you get to sympathize and you see certain things that are very different. You have a different perspective on things. Um,
Yeah.
what do you see on the high school campuses um,
Wow.
regarding race?
Yeah. It's it varies. I mean, it varies. I see everything to, like blatant racism. People will, students will call each other out their names, and a lot of that I feel like is just because it's a part of the culture. It's part of society. It's okay to say these things. We see these things on TV. We see it in TV shows and in movies and in music, and so it just comes out without them actually thinking about what they're saying, which was why I mentioned that discussion that I have about language with my students and what we use and what we allow people to use. One of the assignments that they had to do with that discussion was they had to go home and just observe, just listen. They didn't have to write anything down, but just observe and listen to the things that their friends say and the jokes that their friends tell, things that their parents say, the types of shows that they watch, all those things, and then understand how all of those influence our ideas about other people. If I watch a show all the time that shows a certain race of people in a certain light,
Mm-hmm.
then I can't help but be influenced by that. If that's what I feed myself all the time, um, this is an extreme example, but I always share this with my students. We're talking about relationships. When you're in a relationship with a woman, I'm with my wife, but if you're watching pornographic videos all the time, that's your idea of what a relationship is supposed to be like, or romance is supposed to be like, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not. That's it's very different from what a relationship is and a romantic relationship is. So, around the high school campus, I see different groups. We have our groups of students. We have, kids that love to hang out with each other, all black, all white, all Asian, or whatever. But then you have the kids that are like, I'm not about that. I want to mix. You have the kids who are, well, I like rock music, so I'm going to hang out with these guys. Or
Right.
I'm part of the band group. We're
Some
the
sort of
band
different
kids. So
identifier.
yeah, but there's always cliques everywhere. And I mentioned to my kids all the time that when I first started teaching there, and it's unfortunate that I don't have the opportunity because I'm so caught up in all these various things. But when I first started teaching, I would do this at every lunch. If I get an opportunity, I would walk the campus
Mm-hmm.
and I would see different groups of people and I would just jump in. Hey, what's going on? How's it going today? Hey, Mr. Patterson, whatever, and just kind of introduce myself to that group, no matter what it was. Or I see a kid over in the corner sitting by himself. Like, hey, why are you sitting by yourself? There's 3,000 kids on this campus. Why are you alone? So I feel like racism is the same way, being able to interject yourself into a different culture and to experience that. It's not always just a conversation. Sometimes it's just being a part of that, being around that, getting a different perspective. I even feel like there's racism within or cliques within the staff. The English department eats with the English department, and the science department eats with the science department. Every now and then we mix. I'll go over to the history department and hang out in their lounge, and they'll come over to our lounge. But that's the way it should be. It starts, like I always say, from the top down.
Hmm.
If my family, if my kids see me act a certain way or behave a certain way all the time, it doesn't matter what I say to them. They're watching what I do. And so they're going to follow suit. They're going to think, hey, my dad does this all the time. That's okay. Same with, our leadership, in the government, our leadership at high schools. At high schools, if our leadership, our teachers are acting or behaving a certain way, then what do we expect our students to do? So we have to lead by example in all cases. You know.
If I can kind of like parse out
Yeah,
what you're saying, because
sure,
I
sure,
think
sure.
there's a lot of layers to what you're saying. But if we were to look at the whole conversation, it's almost a analyze what like the culture that you're in, and maybe even analyze yourself, and recognize like that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but recognize that if I'm constantly tearing people apart, right?
Mhm.
If I'm constantly criticizing, well then that's kind of what I'm going to get in return, right? That's kind of like it's and maybe in as it regards to race, like pay attention, like make your jokes good jokes, right? That are maybe not race specific, or maybe aren't tearing people down amongst a certain community of blacks to blacks or whites to whites or whatever,
Right.
because then when it gets repeated back to you in another way, right, from another person, it's like, whoa. And it's a it's almost a wake up call, I guess, where um, where I think that the Bible talks about, or I shouldn't say the Bible. My mom would say this growing up, uh, but it's based off of the Bible, but it's basically make sure your words are sweet because you might just have to eat them, like, and it's kind of what I'm hearing from you is this, you give this assignment to your students, go home and listen, right, and if someone were to be a fly on the wall listening to your conversation, what will they hear?
Right. Right.
And um, I mean, I think I see that too. I walk onto the campus and I see the special ed people only sitting with the special ed people, right? And I see definitely the goth emo kids, all hanging out together, and the theater kids all hanging out together, and those types of things. But um, I like what you said about interject yourself, like and just introduce yourself and just be a part of it and kind of accept it for who it is. If I had a student who maybe doesn't have any people of color friends, how like what might how would you suggest for them to go and make some friends that maybe have a more diverse friend circle?
Yeah, and that's the tough part. I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'll make sure I answer the question this time. I feel like I rant a lot,
Hey,
but
I'm here to listen to you.
first of all, if at Grossmont, if I'm there, feel free. I don't feel awkward. Like if you were to come to me and say, hey, Mr. Patterson, I'd love to have this conversation. Or I realize that I don't have any black friends. And I'm not saying that you have to, but maybe if that's something that you're interested in or something that you
Right.
you feel like is something that you're lacking, then I'm more than willing to have that conversation with you. But where was I going with that? So if you want to be a part of something, you want to know more about a culture, like I'm part of the Black Student Union,
Right.
um, reach out. Just like anything else, you want to educate yourself. If I don't know something about a particular religion, as a Christian, but I want to have dialogue about, Hinduism or Buddhism and stuff like that, then I need to go educate myself about that.
Hmm.
Ask questions, research. There's so much that we have available to us nowadays, with social media and technology. There's really no excuse for being ignorant unless we choose to be.
Right.
We can access a vast amount of information, but we have to want to. And if we want to, then seek it out, and we know people who, versus like we always teach our kids at school to do valid research. If you're doing a research paper, you don't go, just type in your first Google search and the first thing that pops up, that's the thing that you list in your research. Because that could be Joe Schmo down the street who's sitting in his garage who just has something to say.
Hmm.
But understand where you're getting your information from and make sure it's reliable and it's a trusted source, and then use that to influence your understanding.
I think again what you said is so true, because we're seeking, we're seeking perspective. And I think often what I see when I'm dealing with youth is that they surround themselves with people who have similar interests,
Right.
and we need to make we need to make people the interest, not the thing the interest.
Right.
Like, I just want to get to know you. Like, I want,
Absolutely.
and not we can't talk because you don't watch anime, right? Like,
Right.
that kind of thing. And I think that's so important. I wanted to ask you this, um, because you're a teacher,
Okay.
and you're a teacher of high school, and I think, and this is a hard one for me. For
Uh-oh.
those who don't know, I was homeschooled growing up, up until high school. So like a lot of the early education stuff was what I read, and I read a lot of these things. I studied the Civil War. I studied Jim Crow. I studied these Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, like these types of things, because it was part of my culture to in the homeschool culture, and what my mom grew me up with was, if you don't know about something, go find out, type of thing.
Right.
Um, but one of the things that I'm seeing is a lot of a lot of what would be addressed in a high school, specifically, it's the memes of, well, what I was taught in high school was, uh, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves.
Hmm.
Uh, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Rosa Parks sat at the front of a bus. Susan B. Anthony got some voting rights, right?
Right.
Yeah. Uh, Malcolm X was the violent version of Martin Luther King,
Right.
right? Um, and again, I'm generalizing. These are kind of the memes I'm seeing, right?
No, no, I
And
hear you.
and then remember the Titans happened in the '60s, and everything's now good, right? Like, and I think that we, uh, I know that maybe that was a little too much comedy for, but I think what a lot of white Americans are recognizing and learning right now is that maybe they learned these things, maybe they didn't in high school. But in high school was a lot of this time of where most people get their education.
Yeah.
Not everyone's blessed with a bachelor's or be able to study beyond high school.
Right.
And I think what happens a lot is it's really easy to uh, forget what we've learned if we don't have a personal connection to it,
Hmm.
right? So like the atrocities against black people in America, like I think a lot of people knew that they existed, but it didn't affect them until they saw George Floyd pinned down, or until they
Hmm.
saw Ahmaud Arbery run down, right?
Right.
Or until they heard it with the terror and they looked at their front door and realized that Breonna Taylor was killed in her own home, right? And I think a lot of people are starting to process the history that they've known, uh, in in new terms, right? In new ways. And I see a lot of memes saying like, "I didn't learn about this in high school," right? Or I never was
Right.
taught these things about Black history. And
Right.
admittedly, a lot of history is kind of whitewashed. It's they say history is taught by the winners, or it's recorded by the winners, or something like that, right? Um, how does a student today, if they're seeing these things, or how does someone today, if they're seeing these things, uh, how do they deal with that? How do they fill in some of these gaps of history? How would you suggest, someone not only hearing your story, like you're like one of the most upstanding guys I know. You're one of the most compassionate guys I know. You're one of the most approachable
Appreciate it.
guys I know, and still you're getting pulled over, right? So how do I go back and look at like these systemic things in the past that like I never learned before, whether or not it's because I didn't have an emotional attachment to them or whatever, right? Or because I felt like they were so far in the past when the reality is they're not that far in the past. Um, how does someone go about um, learning or addressing these different things as it pertains to Black history?
That is a great question.
Okay.
That is a great question because I too have felt and still feel to this day that I don't know as much as I should know, even about my own culture,
Okay.
being Black. Based on, there's things that I share with you because of my experience. Yeah, but that doesn't make me well versed in Black culture, even.
Okay.
There's some things that I had to learn. I didn't learn until I was much older um, about I didn't even know about Juneteenth until I was much older. I was in college already
Right.
before I learned about Juneteenth. I also, to answer your question, I think the best way, again, going back to what I said earlier, seek knowledge. Seek knowledge. It exists. It's there. I, as an African American male, my first year
Mm-hmm.
in college, I took an African American studies course because I knew there were gaps there were things that I didn't know. There were
Right.
laws and there was a certain history that I didn't know, even about my own culture. So these things are available. You just got to want to you got to seek it out. And sometimes you have to dig, that subtext. A lot of times
Right.
things are on the surface and you don't see it. You got to want to know more. When you hear these things in class, ask questions. Ask questions. You're like, oh, was that? Because I mean, I think people think Black culture started with with slavery. That's the
Right.
starting point when we talk about history. Oh, it started with slavery. No, there's more. There, there's more to Black history than slavery. That's not our starting point. But being willing to seek out that information, and even in class, ask your teacher those questions. And a lot of times, it's not that teachers are avoiding it. As a teacher, a lot of times we're forced into these curriculums and these timelines, and we're just trying to get information out there when we can. But again, going back to my beginning of our conversation today, it's nice even as a teacher to stop, to pause and say, okay, well, what is my agenda? What am I trying to do? Yes, I'm trying to educate these students, and I know their grades are important and these tests are important. But for me as a teacher, my philosophy is, I don't want you leaving my classroom. Yeah, you got an A on this test, but you're still no better off than when you came in here. You still have the same ideology. You're not thinking outside of your own little bubble.
Mm.
Oh, then I haven't done my job as a teacher. So it's okay to ask teachers these questions. And most teachers in my experience that I work with now currently, they want to give that information to students. They want students to seek out that information. They're eager to learn themselves. And that's the beauty of being a teacher. It doesn't stop. I'm a teacher. I know it all. If I don't know something, my student asks me, I'm going to say, you know what? I don't know that, but I'll find out for you. Or let's find out together. Let's search it
Right.
up together. And then that's education. That's how learning happens. So I think I hope that answers the question, but that's what that
Yeah.
needs to happen. Someone who's seeking out this information and wants to know more, take a class, pick up some books, some Black literature books, the history books that were written. Talk to Black scholars, go to these places. And yeah, you might get looked at, like I said, we talked about racism is everywhere. You might go to a place where it's all Black people and they look at you like, what are you doing here? But
Now they know your
no,
experience from the teacher credential
yeah,
program.
but those of us who are understanding that will even in the Black community, those of us who understand that will say, this person is reaching out. They want to know.
Right.
They're here to learn, and they embrace that. I embrace that.
I think something that you said that was embedded in all of this is seek it out. Obviously, you like be the person to seek it out, right? Uh, like the onus is on me to find out about Black history, not on you to educate me, right? But then
I
the
agree.
flip side of it too is like be ready to be uncomfortable, right? Like I think that part of this whole thing is humanizing it, right? And
Mhm.
like and recognizing like, man, my ancestors were a little messed up, right? Like
Right, right.
um as white people or or even as Black people, right? Like that like all races have some sort of thing that's like it's a little uncomfortable about your race, right?
Yes.
I think another thing that you said that I want to highlight is uh, humanize it, right? And I think that's been embedded in everything. humanize the experience. You know, as you're learning, don't just learn it for knowledge, but now think about what it would be like to have this exist in your history and it never be addressed, right? The thing that comes to mind, you've kind of like touched on this over and over and over and over again, which is gain the perspective, right?
Yes.
Like let it be very real to you. And I know for me, like I had a significant conversation with someone about blackface
Mm-hmm.
and how racist it really was, because it wasn't just someone dressing up, a white person dressing up as a black person, but it
Right.
was a white person dressing up as a black person and then turning it into a racist caricature, right? Where it's like you're over exaggerating certain things to get a laugh at the expense of black people, right? And that's in no way to say like, oh, there's an appropriate way to do blackface. Like I'm not saying that at all. But like
Right.
as we start studying these things, now think about it as you. How would you like to be misrepresented, right? What if someone of another culture dressed up as you and did all the white person stereotypes in the most exaggerated form possible?
Yeah.
We have a guy in chat, one of our students who I want to ask this question for him. He says, if
Okay.
I or anyone else have questions that he'd like to ask, but don't think of them till later, or don't quite know how to ask you now, are you open to being messaged on social media with questions later on?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Please, please. That's again my opportunity and my position as a teacher. I always tell my students I'm not just a teacher in the classroom, but what I do outside of the classroom is teaching as well. So I'm more than happy to have those conversations with you or just answer questions.
Cool. Because I think that's one of the things that's really important to white people listening to this is don't just see your black friends and be like, oh, I'm going to go get a history lesson from them, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
ask for that first. And I think that's really wise. And I think you, Mr. Patterson. It's weird calling you Daemein because, like, on campus, like you're Mr. Patterson. Everyone
Oh
knows
man.
Mr. Patterson. And then, like, the students who don't know Mr. Patterson definitely know that there's, oh, you're the one with all the musical instruments in your in your classroom, right? Like
Right.
everyone knows you. Like literally 4,000 people, or is however many people are at Grossmont High School, know. Oh, this is Mr. Patterson. But
This guy that makes all the noise.
it's a good time. I love it in there. But ask that permission. Ask that permission first before you start like getting into some of the painful stuff, because for some people it is painful, right? Like you talk about that anger of sitting there for 35 minutes. You're trying to feed your wife on a stressful day with your son, right?
Right.
And that sometimes it's not appropriate to talk about sensitive things, and
Yeah.
so ask those questions. Give people the space to discuss, and that's just from me, right? As I've had a bunch of different conversations with a bunch of different black people.
Right.
I asked that question first. Hey, can I ask this? Can I ask a question that's that might be emotionally driven, right? Or might have some
And I think
emotions
that's just
behind
proper
it.
etiquette in general. Approach
Right?
someone and you want to ask something that's
Right.
potentially personal or could spark some interesting conversation. You always want to ask if for permission.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to take steps backwards in like consent for at the sake of
Definitely.
learning, right? We want to, and everyone's in this boat together, and I think that's what's really important is like have those conversations with people and like be with them, right? Like you'll learn a
Yeah.
lot just by being with them, right?
Yeah.
And it whatever the race of the person is, or if they have a different perspective than you, just be with them. You'll learn more.
Definitely.
So we don't have many other questions in the chat. There is one
Well,
suggestion to read The Color of Compromise. Apparently, it discusses the history of American churches' complicity with racism.
color of
Um,
compromise.
the Color of Compromise. I don't know if that's for you or for anyone else. I just want to highlight it for anyone who might be listening to this later.
I'll definitely
Um,
check it out. I'm writing it
uh,
down now.
Other than that, if no one else has any other questions, Daemein, do you have anything that you want to plug? Is there anything that we didn't discuss or that you want
Oh man.
to bring up? Part of my calling right now is to platform voices, and you want to use your voice. So Is there anything
Absolutely.
else that you want to close us out with, or we can even open a whole other can of worms. I am here for you all day if need be.
Oh man, I don't know. I just for you be I'm actually going to be picking your brain here shortly. Um, I'm trying to write a book, and I know
Okay.
this is probably the worst time to do this, but I'm writing a book called Father to Son. And
Okay.
again, that idea of using my voice, I've been working on this for a little over a year now. And my purpose behind doing this is, I want to leave something
Hmm.
when I'm gone for my kids and for others. A lot of men in general get a bad rap. Again, being a black man, a father, I'm going to leave something for my boys to read and learn from. I didn't get a handbook when I became a father or a husband and things like that. You pick from different people and you get advice from different people, but a lot of this you're learning on the fly. Learning how to be a father and what advice to give your son and not give your son, and teaching them how to be a man and how to be a husband and all these things. So I'm writing a book about that, and so hopefully, within the year,
I will
that'll be
gladly
something that
be
you can
at
look forward
whatever
to.
part of that process you want
Yeah,
me to
I've
be,
done.
because I respect you a lot, and I respect your voice, and I I think there's a lot to be said about going to some calming voices, some well reasoned, well balanced voices. Not to say that the people who are outraged and like really going after racism in America right now are wrong in any way, shape, or form. I
Right.
we have the wide spectrum, right, of
There's a place
responses,
for all of that.
and there's a
Yeah.
place for all of it, right. There's not a place for sin, right?
No.
But there, like in
No.
the destruction that has come because of sin, but
Right.
there is a lot of good steps, a lot of good voices, all embedded uh, in all the rhetoric that's out there.
I'm
Um,
gonna read a quote here. Sorry, I was just looking up a quote that I wanted to share with you before you finished here.
oh no, go ahead. I want to get out of the way as much as I can, but
Oh no, not at all. I
um,
was just thinking about um, we're talking about leadership, and I think I wrote this down from my dad, and I don't know if he got it from a book that he read, but um, a leader isn't just the loudest of the group, is not the biggest of the group. It's the person who God has positioned and prepared for the role of leadership. And thus, when you talked about us being friends and things like that, that's how I look at you as a leader. It's not always the biggest guy in the group, although you're a stout
I'm
guy.
the biggest guy in the
You're a
group.
stout guy.
I'm,
You're
I'm the
generally
biggest
probably the
guy in the
biggest guy in
group.
the group.
Let's be real. It's
But
rare that I'm not the biggest guy in the group. Let's put it that way.
right. But you are a great leader, and I appreciate you and your wife and your family. You know, just listening to God and being where He wants you to be at this point. And who knows where you'll be a month from now, a year from now. He may be using you in some other avenue. But the fact that you are being obedient to Him, and because of that, you know that there will be change because you're being obedient to God. And I think that's, if anything, that I wanted to leave you with and the listeners with, is just being obedient to His voice and understanding that by doing that, He will put you in positions where you can be effective. Who knew? My parents said, they laughed at the fact that I wanted to be a teacher. They're like, because we remember you in school. A teacher was the furthest thing from what we thought you were going to become.
School?
Because yeah, I was a knucklehead. I had my issues, and it wasn't even so much that I was just a terrible student. I was just like the class clown. I want to make everybody laugh, and I talk a lot and all that fun stuff. So they were surprised when I decided that I wanted to become a teacher. But here I am, and I thank God for that opportunity to have that platform to work with so many different groups of students every day, and to be that example for them. And it's not always what I say, but it's just, again, I hope I lead by example. The person that they see in the classroom is the same person that they're going to see if they see me at the park or at the grocery store. I'm not the guy who's in class saying, you got to be this and you got to be that. And then I'm at home,
Right.
beating my kids and locking them in the closet, or, abusing my wife and things like that. But I'm the same guy in the classroom as I am on the outside of the classroom. So, I do not take this opportunity and this position that I have lightly, and I can only pray that I fulfill that God's purpose in my life, whatever that is, and whatever avenues and direction He takes me. That's where I want to be.
Awesome. Well, Daemein, I appreciate the conversation.
Likewise.
I never know where they're going to go, right? Especially right now, because the calling is truly to, for me, is truly to give people the voice, and give people a platform to have these conversations. And I think, God has designed me and given, like, orchestrated my life in such a way to where, uh, I've had a broad range of experiences, and I've made a lot of connections over the course of my life. And I'm the guy who, when I go after something, I go after it 100%. So I make a lot of connections with a lot of people in these things, and I'm also the guy who doesn't believe in deleting people off Facebook. So
Yeah,
I make these things, and I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation. That we were able to
absolutely.
uh, that we were able to have this conversation. That we were able to hear your perspective and kind of just discuss these different things. And I'd love to hear more about. Uh, I'd love to hear more, and I'd love to invite you back in the future, especially to hear about, like, the personalization and, like, what you've dealt with. And for lack of, that's kind of a weird way to say it, but, like,
Huh.
how it feels being the black guy, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I imagine that's kind of an interesting conversation, where you talk about this, and I see this pattern in your life, right, where you're the black guy amongst the teachers, right? You're
Hmm.
in Japan. I'm sure there weren't many black people, right? Like, there's a lot to learn, in
Right.
these different things, and I think it'd be, um, it's it's tiring in some regards to always have the attention on you, uh, and again, this is a platform to hear perspectives and hear godly perspectives on how and what to do. And I appreciate your time. If anyone wants to follow him on Instagram, teacherman1. That's teach r man, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I had to like double check when I was like setting up everything today. Teach r man, and then on Twitter, crazy about life 2. Uh,
That's correct.
so I think that you're posting a lot of things. I want to encourage you to keep using your voice. You're a voice of reason.
Thank you.
You are a man of balance. That's not to say anything about anyone else, right? But you
All right.
specifically are a man of balance. You're a godly man, and an educator, and I think that there's a lot of things that you might be downplaying about yourself. Rambling too much. No, that's called teaching. Okay,
Yeah.
like so.
I feel like as a teacher, man, I could talk a lot. My students will be the first to tell you, like, man, he can tell some stories. He likes to talk. So,
Teachers and pastors have a lot in common sometimes. So,
right? Absolutely.
well,
That's
excellent.
what makes us who we are.
Absolutely. So, praise the Lord. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your
Thank you.
openness to the listeners, and I'm trusting that God will use this for His kingdom. So,
Most definitely.
um, I'd love to have you back again sometime.
Anytime.
Maybe discuss different things and continue. And
Sure.
and other than that, we are going to head out of this coffee corner. So
Alrighty.
I'm going to stop the stream.
Thank you, everyone.